Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate the chance.
So let me ask you about the Secretary of Defense. In your estimation, should he face consequences for not alerting the Commander-in-Chief, in this case the President of the United States, of his absence? Even understanding, and I know there's a lot of sympathy for somebody who's like, look, this is my personal medical battle that I'm going through, but he's in a unique position as the Secretary of Defense, and the President of the United States needs to be informed when the Sec Defense is not available.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. I mean, look, I don't understand why the Secretary made the decision he made here. In the first place, I mean, when he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, given his role as the Secretary of Defense, basically reporting directly to the President, the Commander-in-Chief, I think you have to disclose in that situation to the Commander-in-Chief right away that you got that diagnosis. You certainly should disclose if you're going in for surgery for it. And then there's just no question that if you wind up hospitalized and incapacitated for a couple of days, you absolutely have to report that. I mean, look, it's a basic chain of command issue. So I do not understand why the Secretary thought that he didn't have to disclose that. And I think he owes an explanation certainly to the President so that the President can make sure that they still have the strong relationship that they've had to date. I think it's a big problem and something that the Secretary is going to need to explain to the President.
So, some of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle are calling for his resignation. Would you suggest the same?
Well, let's be clear on what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are doing. They want to tear down the Biden presidency. That is their sole mission on everything that they're doing here. We heard former President Trump say that he wants the economy to tank because it'll hurt President Biden. They're dragging Hunter Biden in. They're starting impeachment proceedings, even though their own witnesses admit that they don't actually have any evidence of an impeachable offense. They just want to roll the ball to make the president look bad. And I think the same is the case here. Their goal in handling this situation is to embarrass the president. My goal, and the goal of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, is to try to make sure that we have a strong national security team. So their goals are entirely different. And so, no, I'm not calling for the Secretary to resign. He needs to have a conversation with the president, though, to make sure that they understand why he made the decision he made. You know, and it's not inconceivable that this would sever the relationship in such a way that the president would need a new Secretary of Defense. But that's for the president and the Secretary of Defense to work out. But that question definitely needs to be answered by Secretary Austin.
I want to ask you a little bit about aid to Ukraine and Israel, military aid, where that stands right now. It seems the last we spoke about it, there was an impasse in regards to Republicans wanting some changes when it comes to border security. But Ukraine, it seems, cannot wait any longer. Where are things?
Yeah, several steps here. First of all, Ukraine should not be linked to border policy. It shouldn't be. Ukraine is an incredibly important national security objective for our country and for the world. We have been supporting them. By the way, Secretary Austin has been crucial in bringing together the coalition that has so successfully helped Ukraine defend itself. They deserve and need our support now. The border is an incredibly important issue as well, but it is difficult to resolve, and it should not be used as an excuse to allow Vladimir Putin to destroy Ukraine. It shouldn't be. But since it has been, we've linked it, the Republicans have linked it, to border policy. Now we've got another problem. The Republicans and Democrats in the Senate are negotiating in good faith on strengthening our border policy, which I believe needs to happen. And now you've got House Republicans saying, no, we don't want to support that deal because it's going to give Biden an out in an election year. It's going to make him look like he's doing something about the border, and we just can't have that. So those anti-Biden politics, again, get in the way of policy. There are senators on the other side, Republicans, who are working in good faith with Democrats to get to an agreement so that we can do Ukraine security and Israel security and border policy. The question is, will the hyper-partisan House Republicans allow that to happen?
Speaking of the hyperpartisanship, I thought it was interesting, Congressman, that even over on Fox News this morning, they were talking about what they called the Republican caucus in disarray, House Republicans in disarray. Congressman Chip Roy isn't ruling out ousting Mike Johnson as Speaker if he moves ahead with the spending deal. What are you hearing about that, and what hurdles besides what some are calling dysfunction needs to be overcome in order to avoid that government shutdown, and will it be a long-term solution?
Yeah, this is the problem that they've had since the Republicans took the majority. They have a small group, somewhere between 10 and 30, depending on the issue, who are of the opinion that they have to get their way. And if they don't get their way, then they have to shut everything down. And that's what Chip Roy is doing again. He doesn't like the appropriations deal that was reached. Now, it's an appropriations deal that is supported by overwhelming bipartisan majorities in the House and the Senate. But he doesn't like it. So he doesn't believe in democracy, apparently. So since he didn't get his way, he's just going to shut everything down and not going to vote for the rule on a totally unrelated issue. Off the top of my head, I forget what the bill is. But he's basically bringing down the rule so that the House can't consider anything because he didn't get what he wanted on the appropriations process. And that's a real problem. And that's going to play out as we try to get a continuing resolution passed. You know, will there be enough support to do that, to keep the government functioning until we can pass an appropriations bill? But again, the problem comes back to that small group of very extreme MAGA Republicans. They're small, but the Republican Party has allowed them to govern, to run things. And that is undermining our ability to get some of the bipartisan agreements that are so important, starting with making sure we don't shut down the government.
Before we let you go, Representative, I want to ask you a little bit about how you think the 2024 presidential race is going. As you know, the president has sort of pivoted a little bit in his messaging, but he started off talking about Bidenomics and how strong the economy was. It didn't seem to be resonating. There are still concerns when you look at some of these polls about the president's age. What would you like to see more of from President Biden, and what is he doing well?
Yeah, first of all, he's governing well. He's actually doing a very good job as president. I mean, everyone was saying that we can't possibly tame inflation without sticking our economy into a horrible recession. Well, we did, okay? You know, he has built the coalition to help support Ukraine. He has stopped the war from spreading in the Middle East through skillful diplomacy and the use of defense assets. He passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the Recovery Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. After decades of not being able to do that, the president's leadership has accomplished many things. Now, what he has struggled at is campaigning. He's never been a great campaigner. Now, if you ask me, would I rather have a really good campaigner and a bad president, or a good president and a not good campaigner? I'll choose the latter. But what they have to do is they have to step up their game on the campaigning front. They've got to get the right people in there to run the campaign, to deliver the message, and understand how to win, and understand how, you know, Senator Biden and then President Biden has struggled. He does not communicate as clearly as he should on the campaign trail. That's a fixable problem. We need to fix it, because this election is really important.
Let me just push back just a little bit on the struggles that President Biden has faced, including what our polling indicates at CBS News, that the porous southern border is an urgent problem. That is what our polling indicates. And President Biden, since he took office, the number of people, as you know, apprehended at the border has surged fourfold compared with the average level back in the 2010s. And the data suggests that thousands of people are entering the country illegally every single day, which, as you know, is straining and creating chaos in border states, Texas and Arizona, and straining resources as far away as here in New York City. A lot of people feel the president hasn't done enough to address that. How do you respond to those, to the polling that shows that people don't believe that he's doing enough?
It's straining resources all across the country. But look, what has changed since 2010 is the collapse of so many economies and governments in Latin America. Venezuela. 7 million people have fled Venezuela because of the chaos in that country. Now you're seeing it in Ecuador. You're seeing it in Peru. People are fleeing and coming to the border because of what's happening there. What President Biden is doing, as I said earlier, is he's working in a bipartisan way. And by the way, there's a lot of Democrats who don't support what he's talking about doing in terms of toughening border policy. But he's working towards doing it anyway. He is working in a bipartisan manner with the Senate to get to a solution to that problem. So it's a very difficult problem that multiple presidents and multiple Congresses have not been able to solve. President Biden is trying to work in a bipartisan way to get to that solution. And right at the moment, he's primarily being blocked by extreme Republicans, not on policy, but on politics. They don't want a deal that strengthens the border because they fear that it'll take away a political issue for them. So if we're going to get this solved, having someone with the leadership skills of President Biden is probably a pretty good place to be. Like I said, he's just got to figure out how to campaign more effectively as we head into the election year.
All right, Congressman Adam Smith, thank you so much.
Thanks for the chance.